this is update for June 10, 2023, day 472 of the war, end of the date update. Also, this is catch up for June 9. So I just want to provide a little bit more extra color in terms of what's going on in the sort of finance and economics world. And I added another key indicator that's important and has some sort of predicting power for the future, and it's called M2 money supply. Basically, nominally it's called a money supply, what people have in their bank accounts, their checking deposits and so on. But really what this really means is kind of like it's a credit. It's not really true money in the meaning that this is not equity. This is debt, so it is not true money. But it's the importance of this is this the credit debt that can be then used to leverage everything else. So basically, you can layer other types of debt on top of this debt. And that's why it's important, because it's in a way kind of reflection of the economy, of the economic agents to create more debt in the system. So basically create derivative layers of debt that stem from this one. And that's why this is important. And as you can see, and this is, let me explain a couple points about this. So, first of all, it's declining, as you can see, but very, very slowly declining, right? And so, which is in the long run, it's obviously negative, because it's since it's everywhere, it's a debt-based economy. So that really means ability to create more debt is shrinking, right? So that's a long-term trend, but at the same time, there is another sort of part of this whole situation. As you can see, during COVID time, there was sharp increase in M2, right? So it's from, let's call it 16 to whatever, and then 18, it was 20. Basically, looks like it peaked sometime in, I would say, starting from November to March of 2022. So this M2 has been increasing all of that time. And as you can imagine, since the jump was so huge from roughly 16 to 22, that really means that there is a lot of this initial debt that can be used to create more leverage. So more than sufficient amount. So that's why when you see increasing interest rates and other actions by Federal Reserve, they don't immediately create quick, significant cooling in the economy. And that's why you still see that the inflation is somewhat persistent and so on. And actually, you can see even persistent inflation even with dropping M2 money supply. But at this point, we're not quite, well, we're sort of a little bit going there as well with dropping productivity. That's that's in this situation is possible that you can have declining M2 and still have inflation. But what I'm trying, the point that I'm trying to make right now is this whole mountain of high-powered debt still exists, hasn't melted. It's melting very slow, and that really holds the whole system so far. If this, because it's more than, basically this mountain is kind of like a buffer that allows U.S. Federal Reserve to increase interest rates and not crash U.S. economy, because it's extremely over-leveraged. But it's still sort of holding on, as you can see generally. And obviously, it also affects the rest of the world, because really everything, in many ways, all of the debt in the rest of the world derives from this M2 in the U.S. So again, this is let's say indicator that needs to be watched. It's clearly not in danger zone, but long-term trend, as you can see, is is potentially dangerous, but it's all driven also by Federal Reserve. It's because this decline is due to actions of Federal Reserve, which is slowly draining this M2 money supply. The combination of sort of low stock of M2, amount of M2, and high interest rates will be definitely deadly. But as you can see, we're still kind of far away from that, from perspective of this indicator. So I just want to share this with you, and now let's actually move to Ukraine. First, I'm going to discuss generally, sort of strategically, about this whole offensive. So far, I would say that the initial attempt to create breaches in the U.S. defense, in the Russian defenses failed, and the reasons for that are many, and I would say it's just so bad in terms of management, planning, and everything, that this is sort of logical outcome. It's actually a surprise if something else would happen. So first of all, you've probably seen many of those videos, but the key point there is, first, there is no proper reconnaissance. You always do reconnaissance. You know where the potential sort of assets that can destroy you, and you try to take it out or do something about that. There's very clearly all of these units went there without proper reconnaissance. So that's first one. There's no proper counter battery fire. That's the second one. And then the final sort of nail in this coffin is sending all of these armored vehicles in tight formations, which is making it perfect target for all artillery fire, for anti-tank missiles, like just regular one handheld, well, not handheld, but usually they have this base where they put them. But basically, all of this is creating this very disappointing results. And so far, the only sort of change, and plus also forgot to mention the minefields, but that still can be sort of addressed. It's definitely not easy to address. It's still going to be a problem, but that could be mitigated. And to be fair, all of this can be mitigated if it's properly managed and soldiers are trained. But this also tells us that all of this NATO training in many ways useless. And I would say the key there is because most of these countries, they don't have experience of the full-blown war. Most they did the police operations. They were essentially, there's no institutional knowledge about full-blown land warfare, and many countries don't have them sort of by nature in many ways. So that's a result. Like that's another point that needs to be sort of understood, that most of the training is largely irrelevant, and that sort of shows on the battlefield. But this is not the major. This is just the sort of cherry on the top of the cake. The major one, as I said, is extremely poor, incompetent leadership at the top level, and then it sort of goes down to all of the levels. As I said before, it stops somewhere around the company commander level. Sometimes there are battalion commanders that are decent, but that's sort of more of exception than a norm. So then what's being sort of clear at this moment is that Ukrainian command sort of slightly modifying this suicidal strategy, and now trying to send this armored vehicle formations in, sort of making them sort of more dispersed, less tight, right? That's still not going to address the problem. It's still the biggest sort of roadblock. Again, reconnaissance, the counter battery fire, and making those, let's say, passes in the minefields multiple or wider. Basically, this is another problem there. So then sort of related sort of topics to this. So then if I would assess situation with like attempt to distract Russian military command to other directions, such as this Belgorod, it failed. Russian command did not send any significant or major unit to Belgorod area. Then pressure around Bakhmut doesn't sort of help with anything. There was it doesn't attract new Russian units there, Russian regular units. So again, none of this sort of auxiliary actions, they didn't really help this with the main offensive, and didn't help to disguise actually that main offensive. But to be fair, it's extremely difficult task by itself. By default, it's task for extremely intelligent and well trained army. It's doable, which is, for example, I would say that the example of similar situation was Kursk, if you remember, in 1943, where I actually started kind of like attack started from area of Belgorod, actually moved there north. So the southern German group was actually successful in sort of basically getting through the Soviet defenses. So again, it's possible, but you really need different sort of kind of like everything. And unfortunately, right now, it's not there. So sort of strategically, where this goes, it's may unfortunately bog down and may not lead to much. Just in terms of resources, it's very clear Ukrainian command hasn't used majority of its resources. At most, probably not even 20%, probably like 15% of resources have been used. So there is more resources, but you really need also at least half of the resources left for exploiting the breaches. And breaches are not even closed. There is no sort of even light at the end of the tunnel. So how it's going to play out, we'll see, but it's definitely not favorable situation overall, and not terribly promising. Anything's still possible. I'm not saying like, okay, this is done, dead end. Even in this difficult situation, you never know, as they say, right? At the same time, if, let's say, okay, this decision has been made to abort this whole situation, this whole offensive, what this creates is, if you do it right, it will take at least 3 months. If you do everything right, let's say, it takes probably at least 3 months, maybe more like 6 months, to reorganize, properly prepare troops, change leadership and everything. So again, it means that it's a lot of time at this point, because Ukraine is exhausted. It's very clear, and the West is exhausted as well. It's also very clear. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's this ideal situation for Ukraine where you can sort of reorganize yourself and do it right. Not to mention that with the current leadership, it's just simply impossible, because the incompetence starts from the top, and it always, like as I say, the fish rots from the head. And this is sort of very true in this case. Just to be fair, Russian army is no better. It's the same bureaucratic, terrible machine that's not really capable of much. It's just they have obviously more resources, and that's all. And it's by itself, as I said, it's extremely difficult situation for Ukrainian side in terms of achieving, making achievement here, because there is no surprise. Russian side knows everything. They've been preparing. They did everything they can in their sort of ability. It's unfavorable terrain in general. So it's, as I said, it is very hard. To be fair. Now let's jump. Let's do walks through the front line. As always, I'm gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north. The situation along the state border remains sort of more or less the same intense. There is somewhat less intensity of these incursions into Russian territory. Still unclear who controls that village Novosilak near Shebekino, but it's the activity looks like here is going down. At least the trend of past several days, that would look like. Now let's move to North Lugansk front line. Things here are quiet. This is sort of strategic, kind of like dead end for both sides, so there is not much activity here. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. Things here are also somewhat quiet. Ukrainian side is trying to attack north of Bakhmut, and then also south towards Klishivka. Attacks are essentially not successful. Russian side is trying to a little bit counterattack, push back here. Also no success there. Also out of Kurdyumivka. So basically, it's just status quo. These are more tactical attacks. They are not truly strategic in size, and also, even from perspective of strategic perspective, it's very clear. It's extremely primitive in terms of the thought. Just push straight south, push straight north. Again, this is also poor choice, poor ideas. And then, Russian command clearly understands that, and they just put, reinforcements and everything straight north and south, and this whole Ukrainian attacks lead to nowhere, essentially. And not also on top of that, this does not attract new Russian units from other source of the front line, because there is no surprise. Everything is sort of very primitive, predictable. You really don't need new resources from somewhere. That's why I said the idea here is bad, and that's where it all starts from, because the only way to attract here more Russian units and resources is to create maneuverability, create surprise attacks in different areas that create critical conditions for the Russian side. And as I said, the way it's done, it's just absolutely primitive. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here are quiet. As you can imagine, Russian command is shifting all of the resources, and specifically more so ammunition, to the Zaporizhzhia front line, where they use artillery to basically destroy most of this advancing Ukrainian armor groups. And by the way, I forgot to mention about that. Most of those Ukrainian armor groups, they did not even reach the first line of defense, Russian line of defense. They basically were all, pretty much most of them at least, were knocked out in the gray zone. Again, it just kind of tells you how bad it all went. But going back to this central Donbass, so Russian side is saving resources on defensive, which is super unusual for this section of the front line, because the whole idea here is to push Ukrainian units as far as possible from Donetsk. The only place where there's still some attacks is the Smarinka, which is, I said, this is direct, command of the Russian president. He wants, for whatever reason, to have it captured, and so there are still attacks here. But it's all tactical. There's nothing truly major here. Now let's move to Zaporizhzhia front line. Let's see what's happening. So Ukrainian, so there's this sort of eastern section around Velyka Novosilak. That's sort of one of the main sort of places of action, and the other one, let's call it more sort of western straits, east of Orihiv. Attacks are happening from Malata Kmachka in southern direction generally. So let's actually talk about this Malata Kmachka. So it's pretty relatively weak, relatively quiet. It's very clear Ukrainian troops are regrouping. This is where the major losses were, where you've seen most of those videos or pictures with all of that burned equipment. Most of it is coming from this area. Then the other side is this eastern side, where Ukrainian command sort of shifted attention to this area and doing more sort of active attacks here. There's actually some success by Ukrainian units. They are on approach. Basically, they're very close to this road that goes from Velyka Novosilak to Staromlinivka. Essentially, well, obviously it means this road not usable, but it's regardless, it's not usable. And it also actually forced Russian troops to pull back a little bit from here, from north, in order to shorten defensive lines and increase density of troops. So there is some potential success here. We'll see what happens. There's also being pressure here from northwestern direction. If there are any news, I'll provide more information here. But so far, there's no indication that Ukrainian troops managed to breach here. But as I said, this is, again, this whole salient, call it Velyka Novosilak salient that Russian troops had, the way it's being dealt with is also absolutely wrong, because its ideal target for some encirclement or doing sort of flanking action in forcing Russian withdrawal, which is what typically Russian tries to do, Russian command. Instead, this is like sort of the worst possible tactic, which is just squeezing Russian troops out, which consumes a lot of resources, extremely slow, and eventually may lead to the situation where resources has been spent. There is some ground gained, but it's totally sort of irrelevant because you don't have any more resources to continue, not even mentioning to exploit the potential breaches, but there is not even close to breaches here. So again, this is for now at sort of the attention or the axis of the attack shift here. Doesn't mean that this is the main one. It does look that this area is the main. This Orihiv and Velyka Novosilak is sort of main axis of attack, and this is more sort of supporting or covering the flank of this main one. But so far, doesn't really look promising, let's put this way. There is still hope, but we'll find out in the coming days. Okay, thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye-bye.